Okay, you all know what that music is, right? Oh, well, Kristy and Judith do have something to do with that, but I'll let them talk about it. But that's not what I'm here for. But we actually tried to find out a little bit more about these speakers, right? And I have a few fun facts to share about these ladies here. Judette, who's here to my left, basically loves sloth. That's her favorite animal. She loves eating shabu shabu. Honestly, I have no idea what that is, but I kind of just took that it's some sort of a soup, right? Awesome. Okay, soup. Soup, I take it. I understand soup. And then she wants to be a full stack engineer. That's kind of what she wants to accomplish. And she was apparently a contestant on Price is Right, but she didn't quite get out of the contestants row. I'm sure you're working on those skills, right? Yeah. No, okay. Maybe just being a stack engineer. She's happy with that. Okay, and Kristy here basically said something which really got me thinking for quite a while. She said she loves platypus. I had to go back to my grade 1 science class. I had no idea what the heck that was. It's apparently like a half beaver, half duck and whatnot, and some sort of a badass. It kind of truly represents her. So that's who she is, and she wants to play guitar. Apparently, a teacher told her when she was 3 that certain people are just not meant to play guitar, and she was one of them. That's really mean. I think you're going to rock, Summit next time. Maybe you can enter with a guitar, Kristy. That's going to be a phenomenal idea. She's covered 4 continents and 32 countries. More counting?
No, okay.
That's awesome. All right, the stage is all yours, ladies. Let's do this.
Thank you, Mega. I'm Kristy, as Mega said. I'm a director of program management at Bamtech. I work with the technical project managers that are embedded in the client app development teams. In my role, I look to help develop and promote best practices to help client teams run well. And that was my role in the project we're going to talk to you about today. Whereas Judette really drove this thing, I was a stakeholder and I've been a big promoter of the work in our organization.
And Kristy was definitely one of the biggest cheerleaders throughout this whole thing. I'm Judette. I'm a program manager specifically for the mobile team on Bamtech. And what that means is day to day I support my technical project managers with implementing those best practices, as well as running Scrum ceremonies and supporting our engineering teams. And the reason why we're talking to you today is in the last 3 years, our company has grown tremendously. And to put it into perspective, about 3 years ago, we might have had maybe 200 to 300 people in our Jira and any of our Atlassian tools as an instance. Now we are well over 3,000. And that growth really kind of hurt us and created these communication gaps that we needed to find a solution to close. Really, we put production and getting stuff done over process, and we're starting to really look at how we improve that and gaining more transparency into the development process. That is the wrong button.
Like Judette said, that growth has really challenged the way we've worked. A few years ago, our client app team was located in a single office, and communication was easy because everyone was in line of sight, and talking through requirements and status was not a problem. But where we are now, we're spread out over multiple offices. We have remote developers across the United States, and we work with vendors on 3 continents. It's a really different scenario, and it's challenged everything about how we work, and it's challenged the way we've used Jira. So in this talk, we're going to take you through the specific problems we faced as a result of this growth, and we're going to look at the solution we found in Jira. We'll take you through some of the tools we used, and lastly, we'll look at some lessons we learned that we hope apply more widely and you can take with you.
So from a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with MLB Advanced Media, or MLBAM for short? Awesome. Great. That's a good number of folks. Obviously, the first 2 rows right here, all of you. So to give you a context, MLBAM was actually, or MLB Advanced Media, is actually the tech arm to Major League Baseball. And it started in the year in 2000. And its original goal was to bring a cohesive look and feel to all of the ball club's websites, as well as bring ticket sales online. Each of the ball clubs owned MLBAM equally. They invested $1 million each for the first 4 years, giving MLBAM $120 million in funding. It's not a bad seed round. And they started using this money not only to do that initial goal that I mentioned, but also starting to look at how video streaming, and particularly live video streaming, how they could do that and deliver that. Now, this is a huge undertaking considering that there are so many games happening on any given evening of baseball. And specifically, one of the impetuses for this was a player by the name of Arichio Suzuki, who came from Japan to the Seattle Mariners. And as some of you might know, Japanese baseball fans are true fanatics. And so MLB wanted to tap into that group and be able to deliver highlights and clips across the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is the year 2000, right? So Facebook and YouTube didn't exist. Netflix was still sending DVDs out in red envelopes. Many of you probably had flip phones. I know I had a Nokia brick. I wasn't as cool. But only 7% of the US had broadband internet. The rest of us only had dial-up or no internet at all. And I have kids, but my kids definitely would have called that the dark ages. But in August 2002, MLB live streamed and successfully broadcasted the Texas Rangers and New York Yankees game. And again, to put this in perspective, Alex Rodriguez, affectionately known as A-Rod, was not even a Yankee yet. He was on the Rangers. MLB was the first major pro league to stream video to their fans. And by doing this in the year 2000, they gained an early and wide lead in this particular business.
So what is Bamtech? 2 years ago, Judette and I both work for Bamtech. And to explain that, 2 years ago, we split off part of our media operations and some of our client app and related teams into a separate company called Bamtech. And last year, we entered a partnership with Disney that will take our company's story into its next chapter. We're pretty excited about that. In the same time frame that the Bamtech split happened, we began using our platforms to serve other partners beyond baseball. Basically, we wanted to bring the streaming goodness that we brought to baseball to other organizations. So we worked, some of the partners we worked with were WWE and NHL and HBO Now, which Mega was hinting at. And so over this time period, not only have we grown to serve other partners, we've also, in the client app teams, grown to expand our offerings on an ever-growing list of devices. So our teams now support web, mobile. We support devices like Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire. We're on gaming consoles like PlayStation and Xbox. And we're on smart TVs. And I couldn't even count the number of models and manufacturers we support. It's definitely a challenge, but I think users take it for granted that if they want to watch their game or their media, they want to watch it on their favorite device, and we want to be there for them. But what this means in practice is it's a pretty challenging world to live in. And for our product owners, that means to roll out a feature set, they're working with a number of different development teams. And while the apps are we want the apps to be very similar. We want consistent feature sets. We want consistent branding. The platforms themselves are technically very different, and it involves a number of different development teams. So to take a look at how we go about this, let's look at our teams. For any given partner like MLB TV, we have a single, extremely busy product owner, and we have client development teams that are aligned by client type. And as we've grown, we have added the same structure and repeated it for every new partner that we've added. And with this growth, and with our geographic with our different geographic locations, where we found ourselves about a year ago is that the teams were working in a very siloed way. And what this meant was each team was developing processes that were unique to their team, but realistically, all the teams really were solving very similar problems. And what this meant in Jira was all kinds of different custom screens and fields and workflows. I think in the keynote there was that slide with the global admins and all the global admins saying, "Mwahaha." Well, we had these global admins scattered throughout this picture, and they'd really gone to town in customizing it the way they needed it to be customized. So where we found ourselves was a very chaotic situation.
But in this chaos, there was actually a process with the product owner sharing their user story that was somewhat consistent and had grown organically. And this is where we kind of centered our focus in terms of how we wanted to close these communication gaps. So this organically grown process was our product owner sharing the user stories that they created in a very manual way. So here's our user story and our product owner. And the product owner would actually clone this ticket. And what that created were some superfluous information for the development teams, because there was things like business requirements, business needs that didn't really need to be shared with the development team, and that might actually influence potentially their prioritization. And then the product owner would then manually move this ticket over to the each development team. And like Kristy said, we sometimes had 15 teams that were working on a single feature. So imagine, for those of you who are familiar, going to the More menu, clicking clone, then going to the More menu, clicking move, and then manually having to go through that wizard. And maybe some of our advanced users were doing the clone and move process, which was really high tech. It just took a lot of time and a lot of energy for a product owner to do this process. In that process, some product owners definitely skipped steps, and sometimes there was a change in the development process that required some communication back to the product owner, or maybe an update to the actual user story, the original user story. And those links sometimes didn't exist because people had taken shortcuts for whatever reason. And so there just really was this network of tickets and network of work that was being done that was really not being properly portrayed in Jira. And so I came in to MLBAM about a year and a half ago, and this chaotic situation is kind of what I jumped into. My first project wasn't to manage an HBO or a WWE, like how we normally bring a project manager on, but really to help my team identify, and two of my teams identified the delta of work that was left between their phase 1 launch of an app and the phase 2. And what I went into Jira, I was looking at tickets because I knew they existed there, but what I found were engineering tickets that clearly were building a feature that was being asked of from product without any link to a product user story. User stories that were wholly out of date, and that the scope of work had changed over time. No links, just chaos, like Kristy said. And so this was the impetus for the solution that we thought about and eventually implemented. And so we thought about some clear goals we wanted to achieve in this creation of the solution. And the first was a single source of truth. We knew that people were using Jira in a way, but it was becoming unreliable because there were so many different versions of a user story. There were so many different truths that existed in Jira. So we wanted to create a place for that truth and then also create a path for the development teams to go back and be able to refer to either success criteria or requirements in a very clear way. And so that was our main goal, that we wanted to create that clear path to the single source of truth.
A related goal was we needed to make it ticket creation easy. Not only were there many versions of tickets and user stories, there were many that were just altogether missing. Our product owners weren't too crazy about using Jira. They regarded it as a bad neighborhood that they didn't want to go in alone. And sometimes user requirements, what essentially amounted to user stories, would show up on wiki pages or email threads. So we needed to get our product owners to use Jira consistently and to make sure that the work we were doing could be tracked. All the work we were doing could be tracked. So we looked at a couple things that was making it difficult. One was all those issue types. Every team had their favorites. So we thought, how can we pare it down to a set that's minimal and that just makes sense for our product owners? Another thing were those custom fields. Every team had their favorite custom fields too. And we looked at, well, what are really essential? What do we want to track? And we pared it down so that a product owner could get a ticket in quickly. Another thing was those multiple step Jira processes that Judette talked about. We thought about, how can we allow a product owner to do all those steps in a single button click?
In line with that easy ticket creation, we thought about the links that existed in our system. We had about 15 different links that a user could choose from, and that was 30 different relationships. Essentially, we were putting our users in a paradox of choice. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that is a theory that when someone is presented with so many choices, the anxiety level to choose just takes over them, and they just don't make a decision at all. And that's really what ended up happening with our linking and people not wanting to link. They just didn't know which one to choose. And so we pared down and audited the links that were being used in our system. But we also thought about, okay, if we're paring them down, why don't we just automate the process and try to find a tool that allowed us to automatically link tickets and identify that ticket for the user.
We needed to standardize the workflows too. All the different workflows out there was creating a lot of confusion. We have a QA team that we share amongst the different projects, so they move from team to team, and they would get really confused when looking at someone's Agile board versus another team's. For example, a validated state in the context of one board might mean that it had been through a peer review. Validated in another project might mean that it had already been through QA and it was verified. A third project, it might mean that the ticket had been through a device-specific certification process and was ready for launch. So that confusion was endemic. And we knew to create a common language about how our work and the progress of it, we needed common workflows that would help us there. Another thing was we wanted to look at our best practices and embed those in our workflows so that no teams are skipping steps.
And finally, I think all of you kind of think about this goal is how do we report on this, right? We're doing all of these things to standardize and to bring things together, but how do we report on this? For us, a major driver of this is our stakeholders and organizational leadership asking the same questions over and over again, right? How far along is the development team? How much more work do we have to build this feature? When is it going to be done? And what we needed to do was look for a tool that allowed us to visually show the work in progress across many different projects, and also be able to show the dependencies within those projects and in relation to each other. And all of that needed to be shown in some really easy way, visual way.
So how did we go about solving these, or meeting these goals? Going back to that single source of truth. To address this, we established a pattern for our projects. First, we designated for the product owner a single source project. And then this is the project that the product owner writes tickets in. They refine them, they review them with all of the client development teams, really flesh out the detail that's needed. And once the ticket's in great shape, that ticket's cloned out to a set of projects we call the descendant projects. And these are the teams themselves may add device-specific information, and it's in the context of this project that the software work is done. Now the part on the right, the descendant set of projects, isn't so different from where we started. Each team already had, essentially, projects. But what would happen in practice was the product owner might write a user story, put it in the first project, review it with that team, and then maybe add some more detail or add some device-specific detail, then clone it out in that way that Judette was describing. And the second team would then look at the ticket, maybe some changes had happened to the ticket or the requirement in the meantime, that would get added there. It would get cloned out again. So in the end, we'd find ourselves with this series of tickets, all pertaining to the same feature, but they would have very different content in very different state. So we didn't have that single source of truth. But by designating the source project and really kind of slowing down some of our processes, we have that single source of truth that we can know is the canonical user requirements.
That second goal that we talked about was ease of creation. So prior to this, a user would create an epic and then a user story and then maybe a design task or maybe a back-end service requirement, all from scratch, right? And we know how easy it is to create stories within epics, but we thought about there's some information that most of our product owners were including in epics that could easily be a bulleted list of user features as an example. Why don't we just port that information into the subsequent user story? So instead of creating from scratch, they're actually deleting information and keeping it kind of concise within that particular user story. Then we thought about, well, why don't we also do this for subsequent tasks or maybe simultaneously developed tasks? So being able to bring in the success criteria of a user story, asking someone like a back-end team to be able to build against that and understand what the success criteria, or maybe an epic link, if it's a larger feature, would mean, and being able to port that automatically. We needed to look at this as a way to ease that creation and also make it scalable across many user stories.
So the links are important. The network of links describe the feature. The network of tickets describe any given feature. So making sure that they were created in that automated way was pretty key. You know, the links come into play in a number of ways. Epics, in a way that you're familiar with, related user stories. And similarly, we have that source user story, and it's related directly to the descendant project user stories. And the feature might include some back-end service tickets that are also part of the story. And making sure that those links were always created in the way we expected in a foolproof way was really key to getting this correct.
And we talked about standardizing the workflows, and we did that. And we also thought about specifying workflows for our specific functions, right? So our which didn't exist before. So our development teams all now have a standardized workflow against all development process, which includes things like in review for identifying what a pull request is in review, or the QA process specifically. So we combated exactly what Kristy was talking about when it came to our shared QA team, that common language was starting to be built. But we also looked specifically at the product owners and their workflow and identified what statuses we might need to capture within the product workflow. Before this, they kind of used a hybrid workflow that was similar to the development process, but there were some pieces of information that were getting lost, such as the discovery and planning process that they usually did cooperatively with our partners, but also things such as stakeholder review. Some of our clients like to get their hands dirty, and we needed to identify that, hey, the stakeholder is holding on to this for just right now, and so the developers can see that and understand that that might be coming down the line, but know that it's not actually going to be scoped for work in the future. This allowed us to really also identify transitions and workflows that are intentional, use language that is intentional with our product group, and also encourage best practices through the language in Jira.
So being able to report progress was a key output of this effort. I think the steps we took to meet the previous goals, like ensuring first that all work was in Jira, and linking our tickets in a way that gave us the mechanism we needed to really look at the progression of work across the implementations. So we'll talk to the tools we used that gave us that.
Before we talk specifically about the tools, I want to give you a high-level overview of like what this looks like from start to finish. So we talked about our source project and our descendant project. And we've been talking a little bit about the transition and the workflows, but this is where exactly we've been focusing our efforts on. And the tools that we'll talk to in just a moment will highlight exactly what we did. But first, we wanted to, again, ease that creation of tickets for our product owners. And so within our source and our descendant projects, they're linked through this automated process where a product owner sees a transition and can automatically clone and move all of the descendant tickets into multiple projects. Sometimes this can be 2 to 3 projects, so maybe Android, iOS, and web, and sometimes it can be 10 projects, including all of our connected devices. And when a user story is refined and ready to go, a user can just click that button and it goes into the backlog for all of those development teams. We also made sure that this was a conditioned transition, so only certain people could see it, and also only certain people could execute it based on project role. The second piece of this is that automated linking into other projects. So if a backend services team or maybe a design team is simultaneously developing at the same time as a product owner is iterating on their user stories, we wanted to use those transitions to prompt someone to think about what they needed prior to actual user story completion. So if someone was trying to figure out maybe a user services or maybe an account creation process, and that does require some back-end servicing, like databasing, for example, if that's a verb, being able to create that ticket and that task was really important for us. But we needed to link it back to that user story that was requiring the work for our teams. And then finally, this automated process allowed our development teams the clear, transparent link back to the user story. And what that's led in for us is maybe a mobile team is working on a particular feature and is pulling the data from a backend services team. And all of the automated links make it really easy for that mobile team to be able to see that a Roku team is working on the same thing. And they might have start that discussion around, hey, if you're working on this, we need to talk about this blocker, right? And all of those automated links allow us to see those networks in between everything. We set up the same mentality between source and descendant projects in Confluence as well. So we mimicked the same structure and the same automation within Confluence. What that resulted in really are 3 things. So first, it was like the loss in tickets, and we have less abandoned tickets, so that's definitely a key thing. We've really changed the philosophy of our company. So first, a year and a half ago, it was kind of like, if it's in Jira, okay, whatever. But now we've actually transitioned it to, if it's not in Jira, we're not going to work on it, which is a huge cry from where we were a year and a half ago, for sure. Finally, in terms of numbers, when we transitioned our product teams from the original workflow to this, what we call the V2 workflow, we saw a 50% increase in ticket creation, which was huge. For some teams, it kind of went a little crazy because they started making tickets erroneously. But for many of our teams, it really allowed that solidification of the product owner was working in Jira, and this is the source of truth. So that really helps us to this day. So let's talk about the tools that we used to help us build this solution. And we used 3 that we're focusing on today. The first is Bob Swift's Create on Transition, and this is the key for our automation. This allows us to really identify and use post functions within the context of the workflow to be able to do all of that porting of fields, automatic linking, and everything that we've been talking about to ease that ticket creation. So here's an example of a Jira workflow that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And Bob Swift's Create on Transition allows us to focus on the transition. And we use this as a prompt. So I spoke about how we kind of try to raise that flag and say, hey, product owner, maybe you need a backend services request at this point, maybe for this epic or maybe for this story in the planning phase. We do the same for design tasks as well. This allows us to create a UI around the workflow, really, for our product owners and for others as well. This is an example of our actual process and our workflow. So we have a status of on hold in planning. We have the transition, which is create platform tickets, and that automatically moves the ticket that is being transitioned into the work queue, because this is where the user story is moved into the descendant projects. Create on Transition allows us then to execute a post function based on this information. So we have our conditions based on project roles, which is the number 2 around conditions. But then you can see here there's a condition value specifically to the project, to the post function, which indicates that there's a custom field that when it is chosen, in this case it is identifying which project it's going to go into. So is it going to be an Android user story or perhaps a Roku user story? When that field is not null, when it's not empty, then this post function occurs. And it then ports all of the information, the variables that you see, such as original summary, original description, parent issue type. This also allows us to link that information automatically. So we take the original key, we identify the link of spawns, because it's spawning work, and we do the link direction from the issue key to the new key. And this is what we've used to be able to take all of those multi-step processes, automate that creation of tickets for multiple steps. Bob Swift has been a really key tool that we've had it in our Jira instance.
Another integration that really helped us is structure. With it, you can take tickets from different projects and join them and look at them in a hierarchy and do some pretty useful things. One thing, our project owners can reprioritize user stories. They can apply bulk changes to a set of tickets that have already been spawned. But maybe most importantly for us, it allows us to get that big picture view of progress that was so important. This is a basic view, and we see progress in terms of a bar graph. And structure allows you to customize the calculation of progress based on your workflows, and ours is tweaked out to our workflows. In a detailed view, you can see additional detail like time remaining and the priority of different issues. And it's been a real help for us, and it's really made it easy to report out to stakeholders.
And finally, adaptive script runner has been key. Our developer teams rely heavily on our Agile boards, and being able to use this source project to build the context around the descendant projects was really important. But if our development teams didn't necessarily see that information, sometimes it created friction because they didn't know what they were working on or why. So this is an example of our Roku backlog, and this is specific for MLB TV. And you can see that the backlog itself is all Roku tickets. But on the right, you can see that epics are pulling from different projects. So in this case, Roku Core, who is a group of engineers that specifically support the devices of Roku and try to generally develop ways to improve the experience, in this case for low-end devices. And MLB Ref, and that is our reference app. So that's where our product group works within to be able to identify the features they want the Roku team and other teams to build upon. So being able to use Script Runner to extend the visibility for our Agile boards out into different projects has really allowed our teams and our development groups to understand the context under which they're working in. Finally, the cloning of projects was really key, and we use Script Runner to do that as well. So you can only imagine with the post functions, and using the variables is really key, but being able to push all of the tickets into the designated projects needs to be tweaked per property. And so cloning the projects allows us to create this network of tickets or network of projects within 5 minutes, whereas manually it might take us 20 to 30 minutes per property.
So we set some goals, lofty goals, and we're miles ahead of where we used to be. By being able to put together these tools and establish these conventions, we got the solution that really works for us. It isn't perfect. We continue to iterate, but instead of asking questions about, like, where are our tickets? How do we get a ticket? We're asking, how do we get better quality tickets? How do we get tickets faster? How do we enable our teams to move on different schedules? It's altogether a better class of problems to have. But our use case, we realize, is very specific to us. But we wanted to look at some lessons we learned by going through this that we hope has some broader applicability. The first is we treated this project like what I call a first-class project. Before, we had a mindset of every man for themselves. But by stepping back and really treating this like a partner project with, that serious mentality, we're going to allocate a team, we're going to designate stakeholders, we're going to put together a roadmap and have check-ins and demos and iterate. We were able to get to a place that was really different than where we had before. We really were able to combat that chaos that had arisen out of sort of our more organic way of working. And that made a huge difference. Along with this, in the same year that this project took place, we hired, who's in our audience, we hired someone to administer our Atlassian projects in the IT group. So some of our power users weren't spending time on troubleshooting access problems or setting up new user accounts, and that's given us more time to focus on meeting our business needs. A second thing was the marketplace really came through for us. We found the tools we needed to put together the solution we wanted and needed for our group. Our use case, we realize, is kind of weird. It's very specific to our business and the way we work. It's not something we would have looked to find an out-of-the-box tool for. So by the marketplace, with all of the options we had there, we were able to piece together a solution that worked for us. So now when we have a new problem, we look there, we see what's out there. In fact, we go there just to spark new ideas. We're such enthusiastic users of the marketplace that we actually have a beta test group within our organization. So if there's interest in a new add-on, we have a group who will download it, take it for a trial run, and then provide feedback for recommendations.
And this beta group is now more formally known as our Atlassian Council within our company. And what this is a cross-functional team that had grown out of the need to combat this siloedness that we grew into. And this team meets monthly to talk about the issues that their teams are facing with Atlassian tools and the suite of tools, but it really gives a voice to those who might not necessarily have a voice in a larger company like ours. I know from my experience, the Atlassian suite of tools are always kind of hid behind a veil in the corner with SysOps and IT. And having our admin on this council gives us the insight into understanding what performance upgrades he's making, what IT and SysOps is actually combating when it comes to just hardware maintenance, all of those things. And it gives us the context to be able to understand what each other is working on. So we have so many people from different parts of the organization, and what we're trying to do is really get good representation across the organization to be able to talk about best practices and the needs. We also are looking in the future to be able to then use this group as evangelists for our tooling, as well as maybe for movement forward. So we're going through a huge migration right now. This Atlassian Council is really our key to being able to get folks to understand why we're making the migration and what those things mean for their functional groups. We're looking into training and also re-education for our seasoned veterans who might have gotten stuck in their ways in our previous instance, and looking for new ways to implement add-ons, as well as Kristy had said. So really the goal is to improve everyone's experience with any of our Atlassian tools. Finally, we wanted to leave you with a final thought. We wanted to quote Lee Iacocca, who is the CEO of the Chrysler Corporation, and he said, "You can have brilliant ideas, but if you can't get them across, your ideas won't get you anywhere." And this is what we found. We had that communication gap. We had so much friction because the ideas that we had were awesome, but we couldn't get them to the right places to be able to build them and ship them out quickly and effectively. We found that our solution has helped ease that, and like Kristy said, we're in no means a perfect scenario right now, but we're still iterating on it and trying to achieve our ideas and be able to build them in quality quickly and in good quality. So thank you for listening to our talk today, and we hope that you can take some tidbits of information back to your company to help you guys do the same. Thanks.